good evening, everyone. I'm just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my presentation, Haunted by. First of all, I want to say that I am very excited to be presenting here at ANOMACON for the second year in a row. So thanks to ANOMACON and Ryan Sprague for having me here. My name is Zelia Edgar, though I'm probably better known by my YouTube handle, Just Another Tinfoil Hat, especially if you are a devoted listener of the fantastic podcast, Somewhere in the Skies, where you can catch episodes of Just Another Tinfoil Hat every other Friday. I am a lifelong resident of Wisconsin, America's scary land, and I call it that for some very good reasons. My home state is also home to 3 UFO capitals of the world, 2 cannibalistic serial killers, and more sightings of the dog man than you can shake a stick at. While growing up surrounded by such rich weirdness may have helped kick off my fascination with the unexplained, it was fellow researchers and fellow Wisconsinites Chad Lewis and Linda Godfrey that really helped solidify my early interest in the paranormal into a full-blown obsession. I have one book currently out entitled Just Another Tinfoil Hat Presents, and I do have a second book coming out later this year through Beyond the Fray Publishing, so keep an eye out. My specific interest in the paranormal is an interest in high strangeness. So, what is high strangeness as opposed to your regular run-of-the-mill strangeness? I mean, it is the paranormal. It's all a little weird. High strangeness research kind of follows the concept that there are these patterns that exist between apparently different types of paranormal phenomenon, and that therefore the different branches of research into the paranormal, we're talking spectrology, ufology, cryptozoology, are all interconnected. And it also seems to point to the notion, too, that the paranormal is not just interconnected among its different fields of research, but also deeply connected to us, to the human experience. So on that note, today we're going to be discussing hauntings, but not just any hauntings. Today we're going to discuss being haunted by Bigfoot, being haunted by UFOs, being haunted by werewolves, stories that are, honestly, just plain weird. But before we get into this kind of supernatural, let's start with a true classic of ghost research, a case which actually occurred mere minutes from the town that I grew up in, and was even featured on Unsolved Mysteries. If you can believe it, I grew up watching those reruns. This, of course, is the case of the Tallman haunted bunk beds. Now, to make a long and very strange story short, Alan and Deborah Tallman moved into a home in the small town of Horicon, Wisconsin in 1986, with their 2, at the time, soon-to-be 3 children. It was a new home, built only 2 years before they moved in, and the property had no previous history that we know of odd occurrences or traumatic events. Until about a year after they moved in, when they purchased the by now infamous haunted bunk beds. Now, these bunk beds were indeed secondhand, but again, there's no information as to why these bunk beds would be the nucleus of any sort of bizarre paranormal occurrences. Regardless of what started the phenomenon, it did. Items began moving around the house of their own accord. The family claimed to see a suitcase slide out from under the bed and then slide back in. They said that the clock radio switched stations. Not just electronically, they could actually see the knob moving as though being turned by unseen fingers. A paintbrush apparently submerged the handle, so kind of upside down, into a can of paint all by itself, and the family began having these recurring nightmares. However, the nightmares did not stay in dreamland. Apparitions began appearing in the Tallman home. Alan's mother, watching the kids one night, claimed to see red eyes looking in the window. Around Christmas, the 8-year-old Tallman boy claimed that a 3-foot-tall figure of an old woman was standing by his bedroom door watching him sleep. He began sleeping in the living room to escape the nightly occurrences, where she suddenly reappeared, and she continued to reappear time and time again. At one point, a pillar of mist rose from the floor, transformed into a humanoid shape, pointed at Alan, and said, "You're dead." The Horicon police were finally called in to investigate. They were looking at first for secret Scooby-Doo style projections, and even more terrifying, carbon monoxide poisoning. Local pastors came to bless the home on multiple occasions, but neither the authorities nor the higher authorities made any difference. The phenomenon continued. However, the final straw involved a nephew who was staying with the Tallmans. While Alan worked the night shift, this nephew apparently would lie on the floor of the children's room as they went to sleep to kind of keep an eye out for any odd disturbances. One evening, he heard one of the girls kind of jump up and call out, "Hi there." He looked up and saw a hovering, misty figure, which moved towards him and said ominously, "Now you're involved," before evaporating. This was the final straw for the Talmans. They moved out shortly thereafter, and the home was purchased by another family who experienced nothing out of the ordinary. Now, this case is emblematic of a common pattern for haunting phenomenon, which also, too, is the basis for a whole boatload of scary movies. The catalyst: the family moves into the home, or the family obtains or purchases a secondhand item. Then anomalous phenomenon begins, kind of slowly at first, but then it escalates into larger events. Usually they try to deal with the phenomenon either through the use of psychics or priests, sometimes even the police. Sometimes the phenomena kind of waxes and wanes, but usually it either just abruptly stops of its own accord or it doesn't stop and continues escalating until the family moves out of the location. So we're going to go through several more cases of hauntings that follow this pattern, where the haunters, however, are a little bit stranger than the figure of a little old lady in a couple of mists. Much like the case of the haunted bunk beds, this story has to do with bringing an item into the home which seemed to kick up something spooky. This is the case of the Hexam heads. Before we really get into this one, there's actually a mystery behind this mystery, and that is the titular heads themselves. This case occurred in 1971 when two boys, Colin and Leslie Robson, were digging in the garden of their home in Hexham, Northumberland, UK. What they found in the garden were two small stone heads, hence the name Hexam heads. Now, they eventually gave these heads up to different archaeologists, professors. Finally, an expert on Celtic lore and artifacts, Dr. Anne Ross, received them. She will come up later in the story. Again, they moved through a whole parade of researchers and professors before, whoops, being lost. Now, the mystery behind the mystery of the Hexam heads is that at the time, a man local to that neighborhood who had lived there previously, a man named Desmond Craigie, came forward and claimed that not only did he know about the heads, he had made them for his daughter in the mid-50s. However, when he explained how he made them and even created a replica to show that he indeed was the one behind it, it didn't match the actual heads themselves. To complicate things even further, one of the boys that had dug up the Hexam heads also had been making clay heads in the weeks leading up to them being found. Again, though, these did not match the two stone heads that were dug out of this garden. Now, all this to say, and again, the heads today are lost. No one knows where they are. So as to the legitimacy of these creepy little heads, whether they were ancient or whether they were modern, nobody really knows. And to be honest, I'm not really sure either. However, it's kind of beside the point because regardless of the legitimacy of these two artifacts, weird things began kicking up in the neighborhood. Shortly after the Robson boys dug up these little stone heads, poltergeist phenomenon broke out in their home. Objects moving of their own accord, things mysteriously breaking. One night, a shower of glass just appeared on one of the mattresses. However, it was their next door neighbors, the Dodds, who began experiencing quite an escalation in the phenomenon. The children began complaining that something was moving around and up against them as they were trying, and I presume failing, to fall asleep. Eventually, their mother slept in one of the children's rooms, and she just thought the disturbances, of course, were just they don't want to go to bed, it's just their imagination. So when her son insisted that something was in the room, she sat up to show him that there was nothing there. She would be wrong. Instead of seeing the, well, nothing that she thought she would see, instead, Mrs. Dodd saw a shadow figure standing by the bed, which moved closer to her and touched her leg. What's very odd about this shadow, aside from the fact, of course, that it was a freestanding shadow that could physically touch someone, is that she said it appeared to be half man, half sheep. She said that it dropped to all fours and ran clear out of the room, clear out of the house. The door was left open behind it, making hoofbeats as it ran. Now, needless to say, upon hearing this, the Robsons shipped the heads off as soon as possible to Newcastle Museum, who sent them to Dr. Anne Ross, a Celtic scholar. As soon as the heads were in her possession, actually in her home, poltergeist activity kicked up there as well. And much like in the case of the Tallman bunk beds, this was just the beginning. Shortly after this weird phenomenon started, Dr. Ross woke up in the dead of night, feeling like someone was in the bedroom with her. And glancing towards the door, she saw a werewolf exiting her bedroom. She said that it was completely covered in dark fur and standing about 6 feet tall and looked like, well, a werewolf. Now, whether bravely or foolishly, she said that she felt compelled to follow it, so that's what she did. She jumped out of bed and ran after it into the brightly lit hallway, where she got an even better look at it as it went partway down the stairs, jumped over the banister, and then ran to the back of the house. Now, one werewolf sighting is weird enough, but hey, how about another one? A few days after Dr. Ann Ross's encounter, her teenage daughter arrived home from school. Now, she was going to watch her brother. He wasn't home from school just yet, so it was just her in the house, and both of her parents were in London. Now, it goes without saying that Dr. Ross hadn't told either of her children about her encounter. She didn't want to scare them. So she was probably pretty surprised when she finally came home and found her daughter in a state of terror. The girl said that as soon as she opened the door to come inside the house, she saw a quote, dark werewolf jump over the stairway railing and land on the floor. She said that she could hear its paws patting down as it landed, and then even more as it hurried towards the back of the house, just like in her mother's encounter. Now, much like her mother too, the girl said that she felt compelled to follow the creature, watching it and following it as it went into the music room at the back of the house. So in this case, we have these items. Now, again, we don't really know if they're an authentic ancient artifact or not, but that seems beside the point because wherever they went, strange phenomena followed. Now, poltergeist activity, the moving of objects, strange noises, bangs, all of that stuff, it's so synonymous with hauntings as to be expected, although many researchers are very quick to distinguish genuine ghost activity from poltergeists. But again, these actions of things moving by themselves, breaking, the noises in empty rooms, these are perfectly at home in a haunted house. It's just that in this case, instead of any sort of human apparition, the witnesses saw decidedly non-human apparitions. In two of these cases, they described it as a werewolf, and one of them described it as a sheep man. Or maybe it was a wolf man in sheep man's clothing. Now, one thing to note, as we're talking about, phantasmic cryptids or cryptids that appear to also be ghost-like or in conjunction with poltergeist activity, is that, in my opinion, with every branch of the paranormal, the one that still carries a lot of stigma with reporting has to do with cryptids. I feel like it's become a little bit more socially acceptable for people to say they've had UFO encounters, people to say that they've experienced haunting type phenomena, and for some reason cryptids are kind of the last holdout for that. And when you say then that you saw Bigfoot with a UFO, or that the poltergeist activity in your house wasn't accompanied by some little Victorian girl in a frilly dress, but a werewolf, it really compounds that stigma. But truthfully, what I found is that things like this happen a lot more than one might think. Another fantastic case of a spooky spectral canine comes from the work of a very dear friend of mine, the late, great Linda Godfrey. And although she was an expert on all sorts of spooky phenomenon, her main claim to fame really was the study of werewolf sightings, especially right here in Wisconsin. There are a lot of people who claim to see werewolves, dogman, the man-wolf, whatever you refer to this phenomenon as, of these part man, part wolf-like creatures. In Linda's book, The Beast of Bray Road, she discussed the case of Mark Shackleman, a man who had worked as a night watchman for St. Coletta's just outside of Jefferson, Wisconsin. Now, St. Coletta's is a very interesting location in its own right. Up until recently, it was a home and school for those with developmental and other disabilities, run by the Sisters of St. Francis of Assisi. Now it stands vacant and is purportedly haunted. I shouldn't say now it's purportedly haunted, because even when it was open, this huge sprawling lot of 19 buildings, people reported odd occurrences in many of those buildings, the earliest of which was built in 1864. So it was open for quite a while, and throughout that time, garnered a reputation as a haunted place. However, Shackleman's case occurred outside and across the road from St. Coletta's, where there was an effigy mound, supposedly one that was even said to contain a burial. The Midwest, Wisconsin especially, served as a nucleus for the mound builder culture in the late woodland period, with literally thousands of surviving effigy mounds today, and that's just a fraction of what once existed here. Again, some containing burials, some not. So there was an effigy mound located right across the road from St. Coletta's, and one night in 1936, Shackleman claimed to come across what he described as a werewolf, kneeling on the mound, clawing at it with three of its fingers. When it saw Shackleman, the beast apparently stood up and got the heck out of there, and obviously spooked, so did Mark Shackleman. But he did go back to check the effigy mound in the safety of the daylight, and he claimed to see these kind of like raking marks across it that came in sets of 3. The next night, Shackleman decided to go check the effigy mound again, this time armed with his flashlight. He reasoned that he could probably fight off this creature using his flashlight as a club or weapon of some sort, but he pretty quickly changed his mind. You see, when Shackleman came upon the effigy mound again, the same creature was there as it had been the previous night, kneeling in the earth and scratching at it. However, this time when the night watchman approached, the creature didn't flee. Instead, it simply stood up to its full height. Mark Shackleman said that it stood about 6 feet tall, with eyes that he described as feeling like they looked right through him. He also said that it gave off the odor of rotten meat, a smell very often associated with the kind of less pleasant of hauntings, and it growled at him in what he described as garbled speech. Coming to the swift conclusion that he had brought a flashlight to a werewolf fight, Shackleman then fell back on a different sort of defense and began praying to God to save him. He later told his son Joe that he believed the beast had come, quote, straight out of hell. It was at this point that the creature simply turned and walked away. This case is intriguing for several reasons. The first, because we have this location where we might anticipate a more traditional haunting. It's an ancient site, even a purported burial mound. And instead of, a ghost of a person that might be tied to that location, we have someone witnessing this effectively cryptid. In addition to that, it's something to note that it seems as though the favored haunts of hauntings, where people tend to associate ghosts, ancient sites, graveyards, empty homes, deserted places, these are not just the favored haunts of ghosts, but simply put, everything else as well. These areas tend to have more than their fair share, not just of traditional haunting activity, but also UFO sightings and even cryptid sightings. The other thing of note is that it was when Shackleman began praying that the beast turned and walked away. Regardless of religious belief, prayer, or perhaps more specifically psychic intention, is honestly a well-known defense in haunting type situations. It's just that in this case, it was not a shadow man that was banished, but a freaking werewolf. And we'll see a very similar thing in a later encounter that I'll detail here about Bigfoot. Now, Linda Godfrey's work just contains a wealth of incredibly weird cases. It's genuinely a classic for anyone interested in the paranormal, and also includes a lot of man-wolf encounters where these beings do appear more phantasmic and pop up in odd places, including inside people's homes. So this one is just one of my personal favorites. This next case also reads like a haunted house, but with the addition of UFOs and apparent UFOnauts in the mix. A quick note. Yes, I am aware, I know that UFO sounds silly. And I do agree. I think that UAP, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon, is the much better acronym than UFO, Unidentified Flying Object. The reason that I stick with UFO is that honestly, I love how kitschy it sounds, and it's so evocative of the time in which the term was created, and this phenomenon really became such a cultural power horse. I mean, I feel as though UFO now is its own thing. It's hardly an acronym anymore. It's more just the name for what people experience. So as far as it goes, UFO, UFO, or UAP, yes, I know better and I decide against it anyway. This case involves a family pseudonymously referred to as the Goulds of South Middleton, Massachusetts, and was investigated by David Webb of 1973, year of the humanoids fame, as well as Raymond Fowler. The family included 50-year-old Teresa, her husband, 52-year-old Thomas, and their 3 children, 21-year-old Alan, 20-year-old Nancy, and 14-year-old Douglas. Prior to being a self-employed carpenter, Thomas had worked as a medic for the Royal Canadian Air Force. Now, this case also moves through members of the Gould extended family and continues for many years. The first weird happenings reported by the Goulds were UFOs, strange objects, lights in the sky. As far back as 1962, the matriarchal grandmother said that she had spotted a brilliant round light with multicolored rays behind it, which she watched move around for about 5 minutes before it eventually split. However, the next disturbances would kick up in 1974 when the haunt began in earnest. Sometime in 1974, 21-year-old Alan claimed that he was awakened by a bright light coming in through the heavy curtains of his bedroom window around 11 o'clock at night. Upon looking out the window, he saw that this light was caused by this yellowish, orangish, reddish, vaguely cigar-shaped object hovering behind the outdoor pool. Almost as soon as he laid eyes on it, he said that the thing rose up and out of sight. Multiple cases of strange aerial objects and anomalous lights soon gave way to humanoid encounters. The first of these occurred in June of 1977 around 9 o'clock in the evening, when the grandmother was walking from her home to the Gould home. She anticipated seeing her grandson Douglas, the youngest, waiting for her on the porch, and as she approached, she could see him waiting there on the front porch of the house. She could also see a person standing just off to the right of the house, kind of just in the woods facing away from her. She said that it looked like a man about 5'7", with dark hair, wearing dark pants and a white shirt. She thought that it was her son-in-law Thomas, so she turned for a moment to say hello to Douglas, then she turned back to greet Thomas, and the being was gone. These sightings of what the Goulds began calling the Prowler became so constant that the Middleton police were called on several occasions, but they could never find any trace of this mysterious prowler. The family not only saw just one prowler on many occasions, often appearing among the trees and then walking back into the forest, but they also claimed to see several figures dancing on the nearby hill. All of these figures, they said, probably most creepily of all, never had faces and moved in this unbending, rigid way. However, these, I guess you could say very human-ish, kind of normal-ish looking phantoms, without faces, of course, but that's a constant trope across all the paranormal, including ghost lore, soon gave way to these small, white-suited humanoids that have countless counterparts in UFO lore. In mid-September of 1977, Douglas was playing outside when he heard footfalls nearby. He looked and saw a short being walking stiffly, dressed completely in a white helmeted suit. It went behind a shed. Douglas went to get his father Tom, who came back to the area and actually saw the strange little humanoid. He literally went up to it, went to touch it, and as soon as his hand would have made contact with the shoulder, the strange being simply vanished into thin air. Now, over the course of this very long case, Tom would claim to see the little white-suited entities about 7 times. On one such occasion, he was chopping wood when he saw this little 3-foot-tall white-suited entity standing off in the woods watching him. He called out to it in English, received no response, and then called out to it again in French. At this point, it moved slightly. Now, by this stage, in kind of the grand scheme of the occurrences, Tom had given chase to these little guys several times and found that it was simply no use. They would just always vanish into the trees. So this time, he just kind of kept watch on the thing, looking up every now and again to make sure that it was still there, see if it had gone away. So apparently, it stayed there in the same position for about an hour and a half, at which point it just vanished. Tom continued at this point to his truck. He was done for the day when he came across a strange object in the woods. He said that he thought at first that it was a very large boulder that he hadn't recognized from that area before. As he approached, however, he saw that it was actually an egg-shaped object, about 40 by 13 feet, covered in little windows that he described as looking like frog's eyes. Nancy would later see this object, and she described them as bubbly. Apparently, this thing stuck around for about 2 days, until Alan claimed to see an object matching its description ascend from the property and vanish. When the Goulds checked where the thing had been, all they found were small holes. A definite escalation to the phenomenon, which already is pretty out there, occurred in January of 1978. Douglas, the youngest child, was staying with relatives while everyone else was at his home. 20-year-old Nancy and her mother Teresa were sitting in the living room around 7:30 in the evening when, through one of the windows, they saw a huge yellow-white light approaching the house. After seeing this thing, the phone line went dead and remained so for 20 minutes because a relative, actually one of the same relatives that Douglas was staying with, tried to call him at this time because something odd was happening in the house. At pretty much the same exact time as the sighting of the light at the Gould residence when the phones went dead, one of the children of these relatives that Douglas was staying with called out from their bedroom to their father, saying that there was a man in their room trying to touch them. The dad came to the room, and the kid told him that there was this tall white figure that had just been standing at the foot of the bed. The dad assumed the kid had been dreaming, and as he found nothing in the room, no disturbance, no mysterious man, He told the kid just to go back to sleep. As he left the room, he suddenly heard a knock coming from the other side of a door to an unoccupied room, one that was totally empty. So, now a little bit nervous, he went to go check it out, and he entered the room. It was still totally empty when he heard a knock on the window. Sure, I'll add this disclaimer. It was a windy night. I mean, you know how that goes. The wind kicks up and suddenly the house is making all sorts of weird noises. But the wind can't explain what happened next. See, when the dad pulled the curtain back and looked outside to see what was tapping on his window, he saw a figure standing on top of the back porch. It was wearing this seamless hooded suit, punctuated only by a pair of eyes. Now, immediately upon seeing this creepy thing, which confirmed what his son had been saying, the dad just ran down the steps and outside to confront it, but it had vanished. He didn't see it until he turned around to go back in the house, where he saw it standing right next to the door. This, of course, happened right around the time that the two Goulds witnessed the UFO at their home. Now, it seemed that this phenomenon really did spread to include the Gould's extended family. In February of 1978, different relatives said that they now shared their home with a poltergeist. It manifested in different ways, but most particularly in the opening of doors. The family actually took to shoving knives in the door jambs to keep them from opening. This worked so well for a time, until one night when they were all gathered in one room, and several of the doors aggressively pushed open by an unseen force, sending the knives scattering across the floor. Amidst the sightings of little white-suited humanoids and strange, nearly robotic prowlers, Nancy was sitting on her bed one evening in April of 1978. She was sewing and listening to a record when she noticed someone standing outside of her room through the crack in her door. She said that it looked like a normal guy. She thought it was her dad, and didn't really pay any mind to it until she realized that he was still standing there. So she got up to see what he wanted, opened the door, and the figure vanished before her eyes. Now, there were even more strange beings that visited the Goulds, including little bug-eyed humanoids and tall entities in white suits. The Goulds actually eventually upped sticks and moved to Maine to escape the phenomenon, fleeing the location just as the Tallmans did in their bunk bed haunted home. Very often, witnesses to one type of paranormal phenomena will often find themselves witnessing other types of paranormal phenomena, and UFO witnesses are a classic, where so many of these cases are accompanied by cases of hauntings or poltergeists. I will even point out that in Raymond Fowler's book, Casebook of a UFO Investigator, where he covered this case, which he was a hands-on investigator for, this chapter was entitled Haunted Witnesses. And it's a perfect title for that chapter because, again, it discussed how oftentimes witnesses to one sort of paranormal occurrence continue to go on throughout their lives experiencing many other different types of manifestations. For a personal example, my own mom grew up in a quote-unquote haunted house, sightings of apparitions, poltergeist effects, you name it. One thing really stands out, though, and that is when she was 12 years old, she and an older sister saw a UFO out the window of the house. Her sister was even standing in the room that was most paranormally active. They referred to it as the ghost room. And so here you have these people living in a house with classic haunting and poltergeist phenomena going on, also witnessing a UFO in that very same home. This next case is kind of a departure of this concept of UFOs and UFO-related humanoids pretty much haunting a home. And that concept that this one deals with is the concept of roadside apparitions. Now, some cases, it's kind of a common trope even in urban legends and folklore, the concept of ghosts haunting a stretch of road being tied to the anniversary of a death or accident on that road, and so are seen at a particular time of year. One such case of a repeat sighting occurred to a resident of Elmwood, Wisconsin, George Wheeler, who at the time of this incident was serving as a relief police officer for Pierce County. In the dark, very early morning hours of Monday, April 7th, 1975, Wheeler was in his squad car just outside of Elmwood at 1:45 when he saw a huge, fiery object in the sky. He told the papers that his first thought was that it was a plane that was going to, quote, crash and wipe out the town of Elmwood. So immediately, thinking this was a real, genuine threat, he dove for cover in a nearby ditch. However, after waiting for a moment and wondering what became of the earth-shattering kaboom, he finally looked up, and the fiery object was simply gone. Confused, Wheeler decided to drive to higher ground and see if he could get another glimpse of whatever this thing was. And, by now he was pretty sure that it wasn't a plane crash, which was a relief, but he was also pretty sure it was something weirder than a plane crash. And so as he went to higher ground, he did see, presumably, the same object. He saw that it was in fact this bright orange cigar-shaped object that seemed to have blue lights or flames coming from one end. It passed overhead and then disappeared in about 3 seconds. Wheeler drove to the very top of Tuttle Hill to get a better view, and there all he saw was this kind of terrible glare of this orangish color that was now about 5 miles away. By this point, Wheeler was so frightened he said that he felt paralyzed. He said that it hovered for about 15 seconds and then launched off in the direction of Ellsworth. Multiple people in the area also reported seeing this thing, including deputies who were sent to look for these things that people were then reporting. So you have multiple sightings of this bizarre thing in the sky. Interestingly enough, it was about a year later, in April of 1976, that George Wheeler was yet again on patrol around 11 in the evening when he saw a glow on Tuttle Hill. Believing that it was a fire, Officer Wheeler drove out to Tuttle Hill to investigate, and instead, he saw this silver object hovering between a limestone quarry and a farmhouse, which was about 500 feet away, and this thing, he surmised, was about 100 feet in the air. He said that the silver object had 6 bluish-white lights and portholes on the side of it, and that he could see shadows moving behind the portholes as though someone was moving inside of this object. Also, on one side of the object was what he described as a panel, which had this revolving kind of turbine-like apparatus. He also described legs coming from the object, as well as a hose-like thing on the bottom of the craft, which was kind of descending into some nearby trees. He also said that the top of the craft glowed this bright orange-white that was so brilliant he said that it was like trying to look at the sun. Wheeler radioed the sheriff's office and said, quote, "My God, it's one of those UFOs again," and began describing what he was seeing. He felt as though this part of the sighting lasted for about 45 seconds, when the object started to descend at a very high rate of speed, emitting this kind of whooshing noise and a blue flash. At this point, his car, lights, radio, everything went dead, and Wheeler remembered nothing else until someone was suddenly asking him if he needed help. That someone was David Moots, a local dairy farmer who had just dropped off the babysitter just mere minutes before when he spotted this dark squad car parked at the top of the hill, blocking the lane, with Officer Wheeler kind of struggling partially in and partially out of the car. Moots thought it looked like something was definitely wrong with him, like he was hurt and dazed, and so he asked what had happened. Wheeler responded that he'd been hit. Moots said, "By a car?" To which Wheeler responded, "No, by one of those UFOs." So this is an extremely dramatic encounter of what appears to be a pretty sentimental UFO. I mean, it appeared at the same place to the same person roughly a year, like pretty much exactly a year apart. On to one of the big names in the paranormal world, and that is Bigfoot. For quite a while now, researchers have noticed the spectral nature of the Bigfoot phenomenon. Not to mention the inclusion of Bigfoot-like creatures under many different names as part of the spirit world in many different First Nations traditions. Though this concept was definitely popularized, this idea of a spectral Bigfoot was popularized by Kuchin and Renner's fantastic 2-part book, Where the Footprints End, which includes a lot of great cases that straddle the line between these physical and spectral encounters. Again, researchers such as John Keel have kind of propounded the concept of these kind of quasi-material, immaterial beings, Bigfoot, for quite some time now. So yeah, there are numerous Bigfoot encounters which showcase these spectral characteristics. And there are many that also really clearly embody the concept of haunting witnesses or a location, or both. Cases like the Rochdale creature occurring in August of 1972 in the farmland surrounding Rochdale, Indiana, in which this family was beset by sightings of a Bigfoot, which began first with a UFO sighting and then a disembodied voice. Over the course of that summer, the walls of their home resounded with pounding on the sidings and windows, and was permeated with the odor of rotten flesh, 2 classics of poltergeist phenomenon. When the creature was finally spotted, in sharp contrast to the very physically sounding pounding noises that accompanied it, the family said that the creature was often totally soundless and seemed to not touch its surroundings. In other words, it seemed to be a phantom that looked like Bigfoot. Another case of a spectral seeming Sasquatch occurred in Point Isabel, Ohio, in the fall of 1967 or 68, when three men saw a 10-foot tall ape-like monster rise from the brush and walk towards them. When fired upon with a rifle at fairly close range, the creature screamed but stood its ground. After two more shots, the witnesses claimed that it became covered in this white mist, which then dissipated, leaving nothing behind. When the witnesses ran over to check the area, there was absolutely no trace of the animal, no disturbance in the brush, no tracks, no blood. It had simply vanished. However, this case, which I'm about to share, has one of the most fascinating finales of any Bigfoot encounter I've come across. This case occurred near the town of Frankfort, Wisconsin. I am totally serious. I did not intend to have a Wisconsin case in each of these different sections. Just how it happened. What can I say? It's a very weird place. Anyway, this encounter occurred near Frankfort, Wisconsin in the summer of 1991. And although it is a Bigfoot case, it did actually, much like Rochdale and many other Bigfoot cases, start with a UFO report. This is pretty common with many Bigfoot flaps, these periods of time where, for whatever reason, people in certain areas experience more than that area's fair share or typical share of Sasquatch sightings. Again, Rochdale is one of these, so too is the classic case of Momo the Missouri Monster. Both of these were kicked off by UFO sightings. Now this case is no different. A teenager was cultivating corn on his parents' farm around 3 in the morning when he noticed what he thought was a large lighted helicopter. He shut the tractor engine off and realized that this was not a helicopter. The object was totally soundless, at which point it shot off into the sky. Now, this was a neighbor of the family that the following story centers on, the Massmans. And it was shortly after that sighting, around the 9th or 10th of July, that 10-year-old Raymond Massman found what he referred to as a monkey's footprint. He asked his mother, Rita, to come outside and look. She didn't really take him seriously. Until the 11th, again, Raymond was the first to spot this strange creature. He said that he had seen this huge ape-like being standing by the family's shed. And although initially startled by the being, he actually ran after it. Apparently, he found a chunk of gray fur. Still, Rita wasn't really sure what to think. She wasn't taking it too seriously at that point until the very next day. Before heading into work, Rita was relaxing in the house when all of a sudden, all 5 of the family's dogs began going completely berserk. Raymond ran outside with one of his sisters, and they both claimed to have a close sighting of this huge ape-like creature, which scared them both so badly that they ran back into the house immediately. Noticing now how upset the children both were, Rita believed them. Also, in addition to the fact the dogs, she knew something was upsetting them, so she took it seriously. Her husband Klaus returned home shortly thereafter, and with a neighbor, he went looking for the strange creature, but unfortunately found nothing. Numerous sightings of this creature frightened the children so much that they didn't want to go outside. Klaus began roaming the marshy 80-acre property with a machete. Rita kept a small pistol nearby in case the thing came back. The family endured numerous encounters with this thing until someone came and helped them out. And that someone was a psychic. As in so many cases of hauntings where the family is just beset by phantoms until a psychic comes and cleanses the area, it was only after this psychic came and communicated with the creature on behalf of the family that the sighting stopped, and they just totally stopped. There were no more disturbances. In each of these cases that I've discussed, there are definite patterns that make them feel like a haunting. Spectral beings that vanish or are immaterial, accompanying poltergeist phenomenon, psychic intention affecting change, settings like ancient sites. It's just that the apparent manifestation in one case is a little old woman, in another it's Bigfoot, in another it's a UFOnaut. And I think that the term apparent manifestation is key here, that these different visions may be the mask for the truth and not the truth itself. I think that truly one of the biggest questions here is it the home that's haunted, the road that's haunted, the bunk beds that are haunted, or is it the witness that is haunted? And I firmly believe that there are some places, think big name haunts like Summerwind or Waverly Hills or the Tower of London, where there is this long running history of ghostly events that remain relatively stable, which appear to be dependent more on the place and its history than the people, meaning that there's this long history of people who may not have experienced anomalies elsewhere, but they experience it there, and they tend to experience very similar things to what other people have experienced. So these to me seem like genuine haunts in the classic sense of the word. However, in the multitude of cases of anomalous contact, it seems to me that the anomalous event or events are tied far more to the witness, and that, as in Fowler's book, it may be the witness or witnesses that are haunted. As in our first case, the Tallman haunted bunk beds. As soon as the Tallmans moved out and another family moved in, all the activity stopped. Given that this field is literally called the unexplained, there are still no real answers as to why or how these experiences occur. Truly just questions and theories. Why the Tallmans at that time? Why Officer Wheeler at that place? However, the one constant, and the one thing that I think is really important, the one pattern that we see in every single paranormal occurrence is the witness. It is this human element. And it's amazing to recognize that because we define the paranormal occurrences or entities as being this other, as being this separate phenomenon, as being unknown, unidentified, outside of the normal. But to me, I truly believe that paranormal events are an integral part of the human experience. If we even take a look at the meaning of the word haunt, the etymology of that word, it really is all about inhabiting. It literally has meant at different times to house, to bring home. And in that sense, I believe that it's one of the truest ways to look at paranormal phenomenon. You know, Regardless of apparent manifestation, whether we're talking ghosts or cryptids or UFOs, because it feels like this recognition that there is this other, this unknown, which is cohabitating with us here in our existence, in the human experience. And truly, that might be a little bit terrifying, but in my opinion, I think it is a whole lot more terrific. So, on that note, I just wanted to say thanks again to ANOMACON for having me here today, and thank you all for joining me. Stay spooky.